everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most dramatic stories coming out of Eastern Europe, the massive uprising in Belarus, and the surprising move from Vladimir Putin as he seems to be turning his back on his closest ally, Alexander Lukashenko. This moment could change the political map of the region and send shockwaves through Moscow. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's break it all down in detail and look at why this uprising might be the most serious challenge to Lukashenko's power in decades, how Russia is reacting, and what this means for the future of Belarus, Russia, and Europe as a whole. The uprising in Belarus didn't start overnight. For years, Belarusians have been living under Lukashenko's authoritarian rule, where dissent was crushed, elections were manipulated, and the media was tightly controlled. But frustration has been simmering under the surface. Economic problems, corruption, and political repression have created an environment where ordinary people feel they have nothing left to lose. And now, that anger has spilled out into the streets in a way that we haven't seen in years. Thousands are protesting in Minsk, in Grodno, in Brest, not just the usual activists, but factory workers, students, and even people who once stayed quiet out of fear. What makes this uprising different is its scale and determination. In the past, protests would flare up for a few days and then fade away after a brutal crackdown. But this time, the demonstrations are spreading and they are growing larger. Videos show massive crowds chanting for freedom, waving the historic red, white flag of Belarus, a symbol banned by Lukashenko. People are no longer just asking for reforms, they are demanding that Lukashenko step down. And then comes the most shocking twist. Moscow, which has always been Lukashenko's main backer, seems to be taking a step back. For decades, Russia has supported Lukashenko with cheap gas, loans, and political backing because Belarus was a crucial ally on its western border. But now, reports suggest that Putin is no longer fully committed to keeping him in power at all costs. Russian state media coverage has become more neutral, sometimes even critical of Lukashenko's handling of the crisis. That's a sign that the Kremlin might be preparing for a future without him. So why would Putin turn his back on one of his closest allies? The answer lies in how unpredictable Lukashenko has become. In recent years, he's tried to play a balancing act between Russia and the West, refusing to fully integrate Belarus into Russia's Union State project, even flirting with the European Union to get better deals. For Putin, that's a problem. If Lukashenko can't guarantee loyalty, then he's no longer reliable. The Kremlin might prefer to see him replaced with someone more obedient or at least more manageable. This creates a very complicated situation. For Belarusians, this uprising is about freedom, dignity, and democracy. They want to get rid of a dictator who has ruled for nearly 30 years. But for Russia, this is not about democracy, it's about influence. Moscow doesn't want Belarus to slip into the Western orbit like Ukraine did after the Maidan Revolution in 2014. So even if Putin lets Lukashenko fall, he will want to make sure that whoever comes next still keeps Belarus close to Moscow. That's why this story is so dramatic. It's not just a domestic uprising, it's a geopolitical battle. The European Union has already expressed support for the Belarusian opposition, calling for fair elections and condemning violence against protesters. NATO countries are watching closely, worried that instability could spill across borders. And inside Russia, some are wondering if a successful uprising in Belarus could inspire people in Russia to protest as well. The images from Belarus are powerful. Riot police have been using stun grenades, tear gas, and rubber bullets, but the crowds keep coming back. There are reports of strikes at major factories, which is a huge deal because those workers are the backbone of Lukashenko's support base. When the industrial workers turn against you, it's a sign your regime is in serious trouble, And yet, Lukashenko is not giving up without a fight. He has made speeches accusing foreign powers of trying to orchestrate a coup. He has flown over protests in a helicopter, wearing a bulletproof vest, trying to project strength. But these theatrical displays are starting to look desperate. Even some members of the elite are quietly distancing themselves from him. Now, let's talk about Putin's calculus. If he intervenes militarily to save Lukashenko, it could be very costly, not just in money, but in terms of public opinion inside Russia. Many Russians don't want their country to get involved in another conflict. The war in Ukraine and the situation in Syria have already drained resources. A military intervention in Belarus could backfire and make Moscow look like an occupier. On the other hand, if Putin does nothing and Lukashenko falls, there's a risk that Belarus could turn toward the West. So Putin has to walk a very fine line. He might try to broker a transition behind the scenes, replacing Lukashenko with someone else from the establishment, but without letting the opposition take full control. That way, Russia keeps influence without getting its hands dirty. But here's where things get unpredictable. The Belarusian people have shown that they are not afraid anymore. If they sense that a deal is being made behind closed doors to simply replace one strongman with another, they might reject it. They are demanding real change, real democracy, and they may not settle for cosmetic reforms. This could also be a turning point for Russia itself. The Kremlin is terrified of color revolutions, where popular uprisings topple authoritarian leaders. If Belarus succeeds, it could inspire similar movements in Russia's own regions, where discontent is quietly growing. That's why this uprising is not just a local story, it's a challenge to the entire post-Soviet model of governance. Internationally, this crisis could reshape alliances. If Belarus moves closer to Europe, NATO's eastern flank will be stronger, and Russia will feel more isolated. But if Russia manages to keep control, it will send a message that Moscow still calls the shots in its neighborhood. For now, the situation is still developing. Every day brings new protests, new arrests, new signs that Lukashenko's grip on power is slipping. The question is whether he can hold on through sheer force or whether the momentum of the people will finally push him out. One thing is certain: Belarus will never be the same again. The fear barrier has been broken. People who once stayed silent are now speaking out. And once that happens, it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. Putin's decision to step back from unconditional support is a gamble. It could pay off if Russia manages to install a friendly government in Belarus without too much chaos. But it could also backfire if the opposition wins and steers the country toward Europe. This story is far from over, and it could be one of the most important turning points in Eastern Europe in years. The courage of the Belarusian people, the calculations of the Kremlin, and the response of the international community will shape what happens next. The next few weeks will be critical. If the protests keep growing, Lukashenko may be forced to negotiate or flee. If he manages to hold on, it will likely be through brutal repression, which could only fuel more anger and resistance. Either way, the world is watching, and history is being written right now in the streets of Minsk.